Kwe, Gwanude, Andeli Wisi Wanahamukwasit, Najiopinawabskeg, Basilda Andel Nabama, Gawasus, Nalbanawabskeg, Nagakakagus, Niltibayek, Nalid Haziu and Diane, Ichibalita Hudum, Nelnita Besk, Tarahuska, Gwanude. My name is Sherri Mitchell. I'm from the Penobscot Nation, Bunawapskik. And my family is Bear Clan from the Penobscot Nation and Crow Clan from the Passamaquoddy tribe at Zibayik. And I just wanted to honor my sister who, like me, just came here from ceremony. And I know exactly how she's feeling right now. It's quite a change to come into this space after being immersed in the sacred, you know. And I think we had this really abrupt entry back into the illusion of mind that has been plaguing our world this evening, where we heard that it's idealistic to be misaligned with the status quo, but it's realistic to be aligned with the destruction of life. And so, you know, that's the problem that we're all facing right now, is that we are misaligned with life. And we're trying to find normalcy in a system that has consistently moved us further and further away from our alignment with life. And there is no normalcy within that. It's madness. It's madness. And so what we're dealing with within this system is a serious spiritual and psychological illness that has been embedded into our common system. And so we have brought ourselves to the point where we can no longer continue to sustain life on Mother Earth if we don't stop consuming faster than she can produce and harming her faster than she can heal. And so that's the moment we find ourselves together in this place, is right at this crossroads, this nexus point between human survival on the planet and business as usual. And so I want to talk to you from that place, and I want to talk to you about a way of life that we call Skidjinawe Bamausawagan. And this is a way of life that is lived in harmony with the rest of creation. And so people think, oh, you know, that's just so romantic, right? It's just so romantic, this indigenous way of being. And when we think about the reality on the planet right now, we just heard that nobody can deny that over the past 75 years things have improved. Yeah, my haddock was climbing back up, right? In the last 100 years, we have caused as much destruction to this planet as has been caused in the entire existence of human beings on this planet. In the last 100 years, there has been more destruction caused to the planet than throughout the entire history of humankind. And we are the youngest species. We're the youngest species on the planet. And we are the ones causing the most harm. So we've been behaving like children who have no boundaries, who have no understanding of our connection to the rest of life. And it's time for us to grow up spiritually. It's time for us to evolve psychologically and mentally and emotionally, so that we can once again take responsibility for our place within creation. One of the things that I have had, what I consider the incredible blessing of receiving in my life are these teachings that inform me how to live upon Mother Earth. And this set of core values about what it means to be Silda Dilnabamuk, to be in relationship with life, this sense of kinship. And so our entire system of beliefs is based on reciprocal sharing. This concept of reciprocity that is embedded into all of the things that we do, how we take every step upon the earth. And so it's in the form of intergenerational living, where, because there's this thing that happens in the pop culture, in this larger society, where people like to farm out their elders. Right? They send them to these old age farms because they don't want to see their own mortality. And so they separate themselves from the wisdom of their society. And we see evidence of that in the immaturity that's being made evident by the decisions that are framing the world in which we live. Is this separation from the wisdom of the elders because the old people are being sent away because we don't look at them, right? It's too painful. It's too much work to help take care of them. I'm too busy. We don't do that. I brought my brother with me over here to drive me because I didn't know what I was getting into. We grew up in a house where there was one set of bunk beds and 6 kids in a room. There was a point in time when me and my older sister and my aunt and my mother's other sister, so 2 sisters, were all sleeping in one king-size bed. Our grandparents were an arm's reach away. We learned how to be good human beings from our grandparents. And so when we were coming up, it was the aunts and uncles who raised us, and our grandparents who put the boundaries around our lives to keep us safe, teaching us to be kind, to be charitable, to be thoughtful of other people. I remember being just a little girl and my grandmother waking me up and saying, "Okay, Dus," which means my girl, I got something for you to do. And my great-grandmother had a little store that had penny candy. And so I was learning these lessons and being enticed by sweets. So I was promised a little bag full of penny candy if I would be very, very quiet and do this thing for my grandmother. So the sun wasn't even up yet. It was winter time. It was really cold out, and she bundled me all up. She was putting my hat on me, zipping up my coat, putting gloves on me, putting my boots on, and I was small. I was a little girl. And she said, "I want you to take this bag, and I want you to go up that path behind Irving Renko's house and go around here and, up that way to so-and-so's house." And she said, "And I want you to put this bag on their door." And she said, "And I want you to get a branch." And she said, "And I want you to sweep all your footprints when you come back out so that nobody can tell where you came from." And I said, "Well, what is it?" And she said, "It's food for that family because they don't have a lot of money and I don't want them to be hungry. It's cold." My grandparents raised 14 of their own kids. Little things. One day I was at my grandparents' house and there was a young fella on the res who thought I was the best thing since sliced bread. And he kept calling my grandparents' house and asking for me, and I kept saying, "I don't want to talk to him. Tell him I'm not here." And so my grandfather said, come and sit down." And he said, if you saw that boy on the street, would you ignore him? And I said, no, that would be rude. And he goes, so what's different with this this technology from you seeing him on the street? And he explained to me the importance of not distancing myself from the human beings that I was engaging with. And he said, it doesn't matter if it's the telephone or if it's the computer. He said, you treat people the way that you would treat them if you were seeing them face to face. Because we're losing our humanity, right? We're losing our humanity because we're distancing ourselves. And so we've also seen this with our weaponry. When people fought hand to hand, they had to look the person in the eye that they were fighting. There was a lot less death than we're seeing now. And it's not just because the weaponry has improved, it's because the weaponry has distanced us from the people that we're killing. And we saw this, the risks and the consequences and this offhand kind of gesturing that human life is acceptable collateral damage, that the destruction of the planet is an acceptable risk. And so we've begun to think that way because this is the kind of language that we're hearing all the time. And so this concept of reciprocal sharing that I grew up with has become a foreign concept because we've been taught to commodify everything. Who knows what the first product was on the exchange market, the trade market? Before even that, the woman's body. Women were traded for land, for partnerships. And so once that began, then the next step was to enslave people and to treat them as though they were a commodity. The diminishment of the human dignity and the value and the sacredness of life. And so we have an economic system that has its foundation in that, on the devaluation of life. And everything is based on trade, right? It's a trade, it's an exchange economy. This for that. We trade your right to continue to exist on this planet for profit. We trade your right to have clean drinking water. We claim your right to have fresh air to breathe, to have arable soil to put your plants in so that you can survive, all for profit. That's the exchange that we've been making. And we've been fooled into thinking that there is some form of value in that. And so this concept of having a community that's based on reciprocal sharing seems completely foreign. We can't imagine what we're going to get out of it. How does it work? How do you have an economy that's based on mothering, that's based on caring, that's based on reciprocal sharing? The first thing that we have to do is we have to completely change our value system. We have to look at all the ways that we've commodified ourselves. When I first walked in here, I don't know if any of you have felt it. I do know some of you have felt it because you've talked to me about it. But you could feel the anxiousness and the energy here. This feeling of anxiety, like this franticness. And so the reason why we're feeling that is going to come forward in just a little bit. But first, let's talk a little bit about this concept called Skijinawepa that I mentioned. And so that way of life is based on a concept of reciprocal sharing and the value of enough. And so in our language, it's called Mama Bizu. So you say to someone, Kim, Kim Mamabizu. Kim has enough. Kim has enough to live with dignity, with a safe sense of security, enough food, enough water, enough shelter, a sense of belonging, loving relationships. Right? Alabizu is everyone has enough. Everyone has enough. And so this concept of Alabizu is the heart of, for us, and Chquabanakieg, it's the heart of our cultural value. Because I can't succeed if my brother doesn't have enough. I can't succeed if my elders are left wallowing in loneliness in an old age farm, because they contribute to my sense of enough. They fill me up. And they're filled up by seeing the continuation of their lives through the young people who are following them through their line, and seeing that they're coming up right and that they're carrying on the values that they shared with them. My grandmother, who never, ever in her life, because she was not English was not her first language. She spoke her own language until she was forced to speak English. And that's a whole other story for another day, but very violently she was forced to speak English. Never uttered the word charity in her life. You know, we were laughing the other day, talking about some of the phrases that my grandmother would say because she wasn't an English speaker. But what she knew was the values that she was raised with were being embodied in her grandchildren. She saw the evidence of that in the kindness that they showed one another, in the ways that they took care of everybody in the community. We used to have these things called pound parties in our community where if a young couple got married or they had a new baby, or if they were struggling, they were new to the community, they'd come into our community because all of our grandmothers are Passamaquoddy, and all of our grandfathers are Penobscot, and so we grew up speaking Passamaquoddy because we learned very quickly who was the boss of the home, right? And so if somebody came from another community to our community, we welcomed them in with a pound party. And what a pound party was is that everybody in the community would contribute 1 pound of something. 1 pound of sugar, 1 pound of oats, 1 pound of flour, 1 pound of rice, 1 pound of beans, 1 pound of certain kind of, moose meat, 1 pound of fiddleheads. Everybody would contribute a pound of something so that the person entering into the community, we could know that that person, Mamabizu, they had enough. And so as society has progressed, we've lost this sense of caring for one another. We've forgotten that we are one another's keepers. And this distancing that goes on, not only through technology, but also through convenience, because we used to have to rely on one another in order to survive. And so we still get this limbic response in our body when we have been ostracized, because we understood for a very long time, up until the last 100 years, that to be ostracized would mean death, because we couldn't survive without one another. I think there's 9 identified humanoid species that have existed on the planet. We're the ones who survived because we learned to live in community and cooperation. And our survival is now at risk because we've forgotten how to do that. And so we have extreme waste that's caused by living individualized lives. We have people who are suffering. We have more empty homes, right? Everybody knows this in America than homeless people, but we still have homeless people. There was an elder I read this story about who couldn't afford her rent, so she got evicted, and they found her frozen to death on a park bench. And we say that's terrible, and we go back to eating our dinner. We all saw these images of this baby recently, and her father who had drowned. And we said, oh, that's terrible. And then, we got up and we went to the movies. We saw Taliqua, the mother whale, carrying her baby around for 17 days saying, look at what you're doing to us, you're killing us. And we said, that's terrible. And then we went out and we bought a lot of other things that were wrapped in or made of plastic. And so we're disconnected from the reality that we're living in. We've lost touch with the deep wounding that's so painful that we can't collectively feel it anymore. Because what we're doing to life is suicidal to us. And so we can't feel it. And so we have a story about Kachiniwesk and Ekchamundo. And Kachiniwesk is the sacred feminine, and Ekchamundo is the sacred masculine. And in our creation story, Ekchamundo is the great void of possibility. So it's all matter. Ekchamundo is that void of all matter that was just sitting, stable, unmoving, potential unrealized, until Kachiniwesk came along. And Kachiniwesk began to speak and to sing into Ekchamundo, and she created vibration and frequency that led to the development of form. And so together, Kachiniwesk and Ekchamundo created the great seed of life. And all life was in that great seed of life. And so then that great seed of life burst, and it spread life throughout the known universe, and it's still moving. Very similar to your Big Bang theory. Not the TV show, but the scientific theory. And so our Web of Life teachings come from our understanding of that story. And so they're not quaint memes, like you see on Facebook and Instagram that say, we are not connected to, or we did not create the Web of Life, we're simply a strand in it, right? Yeah, they understand this concept of oneness in this really kind of surface level way. What our Web of Life teachings actually tell us is the underlying foundations of quantum entanglement. And so what we understand is that we were connected to all life through this seed of life. And we understand that any matter that was once connected physically can never be disconnected energetically or spiritually. Therefore, we're still connected to all life. Not in a theoretical way, but in practical, scientific ways, right? Quantum physics is your friend. They're starting to figure some things out that indigenous people have been trying to tell them for thousands of years. So when we think about this connection through quantum entanglement, it's this concept that's so difficult to understand. So the example I like to use is that when somebody gets their leg amputated from the knee down, they still have sensations in their foot. It still itches, hurts, that's because the matter that was once connected physically is still connected energetically and spiritually. Science hasn't quite copped to the spiritual part yet, but they'll come along. Eventually they'll catch up. And so when we start understanding this concept that any matter that is once connected physically can never be disconnected energetically, we start to recognize why 1 in 3 people on the planet have depression. We start to realize why the majority of people on the planet are waking up at some point in the night with anxiety attacks. We start to recognize why there is an epidemic of suicide. Because we are connected energetically to these impulses that we are driving and have become numb and blind to. And so there's an alarm going off within our systems that is telling us that we are at a point where we are risking our own survival on the planet, that we are in danger of extinction. My friend Chris Filardi was one of the authors of the UN report that talked about how many species? This group has to know. Come on. Somebody. Catherine. How many species are in danger of extinction right now? Over 1 million. More than 1 million species right now are on the verge of extinction. And guess what? We're one of them. Maybe we aren't on that list, but we can't live without the insects. We can't live without the trees to create the air that we breathe. We can't live without the water that Nestle is taking away our right to have. We're supposed to be living in a post-colonial era. The greatest form of colonization that exists right now is the commodification of our water and our air. Everybody's praising the Paris Accord. All the Paris Accord is a trade market for our air. It's the greatest smoke and mirrors scam that ever was created. I have a great idea. Let's convince people that if we plant trees over here, we can continue polluting over here because hey, nobody knows that we're connected. It's nonsense. It's prolonging the amount of pollution that's being put into our atmosphere and giving a false sense of hope, a false sense of feeling like there's something being accomplished. Source point pollution is increasing because corporations are able to buy up large swaths of land and increase their carbon credits. And so the people who are living at the source point of the pollution that they're increasing are suffering increased environmental illnesses. There's further destruction of the waterways, further destruction of species. All of this continued harm because we have this false sense of doing something. Because what we as a species have become are the champions of the symbolic gesture. We want to put a pin on our shirt and pretend that our neighbors are safe. We want to put up a meme on Facebook and pretend that we're actually doing something. But we have a crisis of consciousness in this country. We have a crisis of consciousness around the planet. And so when we think about the numbers of people who show up for movie debuts, right? I stood in line to get tickets for me and my brother and my siblings for Avengers Endgame, right? Because that's what we do as a family. We're a family of nerds. That's how we have our fun. Imagine if that many people stood up for the children that are in cages right now. What would happen? Imagine if instead of distracting ourselves from how bad it is, we actually showed up and did something tangible to make it better. Imagine if we transferred all of those thoughts and prayers into our hands and our feet, and we began walking and moving together and taking action. Imagine what we could accomplish. I imagine that all the time. We have relatives who are members of the Haudenosaunee, and I was visiting with them recently. Actually, John and I were visiting with them at a funeral of another elder in Montana, and they were telling us that they have puberty ceremonies for their young people every year. And that every single one of the young women that came out had the exact same story to tell. And so when these young women come through that ceremony, you know, they're in a fast, they're isolated for 4 days. And when they come out, they talk to, you know, 1 or 2 clan mothers. And then they go and they join the whole group. They tell them their story first. And then they go and they join the rest of the group and they go into a sweat. And when they come out, you know, they feast and they have a discussion. And when it came time for the discussion, every single one of those girls had the exact same story and they were all crying. Every single one of those girls was told that we had less than 10 years to prepare for what's coming. And they're young, and they felt like they're never going to have a youth, that it was over for them, because now they had to start preparing for what was coming, that it couldn't be stopped, that we could only take mitigating action to try to save as many people as possible. I was recently invited to a gathering, I guess, of climate scientists, evolutionary biologists, economists, and they brought in some mental health professionals as well up in the Blue Mountain Center in New York. Is that where it is? Is that where I was? Yes, in the Adirondacks. And so we weren't allowed to bring our cell phones into the buildings where we were meeting. There's no technology allowed in there. And these men who had invested their whole lives preparing for a world that they recognized was disappearing before their eyes, these hardcore scientists were crying in front of us. And they chose different activists from different communities across the spectrum, and they gave us all of this information about where we're at. And they said the same thing that these young girls said. We're at the point of mitigation. There are things that are coming that cannot be stopped. And the economist in the group said, well, one of the economists, there were several, said that when we look at where we were with the Great Depression, that our level of debt is 400% or 400 times, I can't remember. I know it was a big difference, higher than it was during the time of the Great Depression. And so our entire economic system is based on a fallacy and an illusion. And that if that illusion breaks, then what we're going to be facing is this particular disaster. And then the climate scientists said, okay, here's what we have. And this is what we're going to face within X number of years. They said 15. The young girls from Onondaga said 10. Evolutionary biologists, same thing. And so we're dealing with a concept here that is based on illusion, that has created a sickness within our minds, that has taught us to view ourselves as nothing more than a commodity that can be sold on a market. Even our most personal relationships have been reduced to that. When somebody's single, we say they're on the market. And we can never be whole human beings if we're constantly breaking ourselves down into saleable parts. And what the world needs right now is whole human beings, fully embodied, emerging in their full power to address the very real problems that we have. Not people who are fractured by illusion, who are selling pieces of themselves off. You know, I realized this, I can't remember, quite a while ago. But I said, I come from a family of nerds. We think a lot. That I was one person when I was with my grandparents. I was one person when I was with my friends. I was one person when I was with the kids that I engaged in sports with at school. I was, another person when I was in ceremony. And then I was another person when I thought somebody was, attractive and I wanted to, maybe get to know them a little better. And I remember sitting in ceremony one time and realizing, how can I ever know who I really am if I'm trying to sell myself to all these different people as somebody that's different in every aspect? And I thought about this psychological study that one of the older women in our community had talked to a youth group about and said, Native people are juggling 7 identities. I don't think it's just us. I think that we're all juggling these multiple identities because we feel like we have to sell ourselves. We have to sell ourselves to everybody that we're connected to in some way. And we feel like if we can't sell ourselves, then we have no worth, because the very first commodity on the trade market was a human body. And that was 3000 BCE. And so we're talking about thousands of years of conditioning to believe that we have no value if we are not commodified, if we are not saleable. And we have bought wholesale into that lie to the degree that we are willing to risk our own lives to prove our profitability as individuals. So it's not only that, the big evil corporations, they're all run by individuals who have been led to believe in the commodification of life. It's a widespread spiritual and psychological illness. And it's far distant from what I was taught as a child about reciprocity. So that when we were growing up, we used to jokingly call it in our storytelling that it was the original information superhighway was on the res. Like you could be 2 miles from home and you could sass the wrong person and you would get your butt slapped that whole 2 miles, and then by the time you got home you would be in big trouble with your parents or grandparents. And every grandma along the way would let you know how disrespectful you were and how, you're a good person and what are you doing behaving that way? I'm disappointed. That's not how you were brought up. What would your grandma think? And I still think that. I was just like I said, we just had this huge gathering in our community. We have this 21-year ceremony that we're just finished the third year of, called Healing Turtle Island. That's based on a prophecy about looking at the sacred contract that led to this way of life that we're living right now. Because there was a contract that was entered into by the indigenous peoples of this land and the newcomers who came here. And it wasn't the shaking of hands or the writing down of words that created that sacred agreement. It was the underlying intent. And here in the East, we're under the Eastern Door, which is the doorway of creation, spiritually. And so what was created here in the East has traveled to the West and then out to the rest of the world. And that original agreement was bound in blood because there was deceptive intent that was entered into that agreement. And so the violence that we have seen rise up and spread across the land, this is the movement of creation from the East to the West. And so we just came out of this big ceremony where we had people from all over the world who came and brought their prophecies to our territory and shared them to talk about where we are right now. And I see a lot of people yawning, and I'm internally yawning too, as I've come off from like 10 days of only getting 3 hours sleep. And so, we have this beautiful gathering where the people from all over the world come, representation from 6 continents. We haven't been able to get any scientists from Antarctica to come yet, but we're holding out hope for next year maybe. But there are people that are coming together from all over the world because they understand where we are right now in this time and place. But I was looking out at the people, and I noticed that there were, because we have an arbor that's probably about as big as where these pillars are. And then we have shade tents out behind that, because we got about 1,200 people that came to the gathering. And I noticed that there was these young people, and it's open to everybody, right? Even people who haven't been raised right, we let them come too. And so there's these young people sprawling underneath the cover in the shade, and there's elders without a seat standing out in the hot sun. And so I had to go out and I had to tell those young people, first of all, I'm real sorry that nobody raised you right, that you didn't have grandparents that loved you. But let me tell you, you got to look out for your elders. Look at these old people who have lived a long, long time, standing out in the hot sun. It's 80-something degrees. And you guys are lounging under the shade and you're leaving them out there. You got to take care of your elders. I didn't really tell them nobody raised them right. I was nice. But when I see an elder standing and I have a chair, I stand up and I offer them my chair, and it's become such a foreign concept that they're like, oh, no, please, And I'll tell them, you have to take my seat or my grandmother's going to haunt me for 7 days. I'm going to hear her giving me a hard time about not making sure that you took my seat, And so that's what it means to us to have this sense of reciprocity, is understanding that those ones who brought us up, the aunties and uncles, now that we're getting a little bit older, clearly John's older than I am. You see he's got all that gray hair. Either that or he's wiser than me, one or the other. And now it's our turn to take care of them. Right. And so now that we're the grandparents, and the young ones that are coming up are being taken care of by their aunties and uncles. We're taking care of the generation that took care of us growing up. And that's how it happens in our family. And it translates into every aspect of our community relationship. It translates into making sure that everybody has enough. It translates into making sure that everybody has an opportunity to become who they're truly meant to be, because we recognize that if I can't show up as a whole human being, then the community that I was born into is never going to benefit from the gift that I've carried into this world. And so I think about that when I go to sleep at night, when I think about those 2 young girls from China who found a way to clean the water. Something that eats plastic and turns it back into water. And I wrestle with, is this a genetically modified being that's eating the plastic and turning it back into water? But I recognize that these very young women have come in with a gift to offer us. Right? And so when we hear somebody telling us that wanting those young people to have a future is idealistic, it makes me sick to my stomach, right? Because I recognize that I am, and you are, the ancestors of the future, right? And so what he's saying is it's okay for us to completely dismiss the possibility for life for all other future generations. That's what I heard, is that it's okay for us to behave in ways that leave those coming behind us without the possibility of a life that has any dignity, any sense of security. Because none of us can live without the things that are being sold. None of us can live without water. None of us can live without air. None of us can live without arable soil that is capable of accepting our seeds and growing us food. None of us can live without our pollinators. And so my hope for you, because I have no idea what they were thinking when they asked me to come here to speak. And I have no idea what I was thinking when I said yes, knowing what I was going to be coming off from and how tired I was going to be. And then they put me at midnight. So, nobody here, because you're all as tired as I am, has any idea if I'm making sense. And that's the beauty of it. We're in that together. But what my hope is that you will take some time in your time here together to think about the ways that you have commodified yourself. Think about what of your own authenticity have you given up in order to make yourself saleable? What part of your inner knowing have you had to silence in order to continue to be a part of the status quo? How have you had to suppress your own voice in order to get along and go along? How have you disconnected yourself from the source of your life? The water, the air, the trees, the land, those are not natural resources. Those are the sources of our survival. And Mother Earth provides us with the best example of the type of economy that we need. One that is based on mother love. where we are given everything that we need in order to survive and to become whole and to become the best that we can possibly be, so that we can in turn share our gifts with the world and cycle all life forward. We're in violation of that agreement. And we have this sense of entitlement and arrogance about us as human beings. Because we're young, we're young punks, right? We think we know everything. We forget that the trees are our ancestors, that the animals are our ancestors, that they can teach us how to live in relationship with life in a way that doesn't compromise life. Because we think that we're smarter, that we're more evolved, and we're not. And that sense of entitled arrogance has been built into all of the systems that have developed out of the society that has been built based on a capitalistic patriarchal system that devalues human life. And to the degree that human life is devalued, all other life is devalued to a greater degree. So think about the ways that we've treated human beings across the globe throughout history, and the devaluation of life that's connected to that. The way that we have degraded the rest of creation beyond our own devaluing of life is far more significant. And so I would like to invite you back into the garden, right? Because here's a secret. We were never kicked out of the garden, right? We stayed in the garden. We stayed connected to life. We didn't believe in the illusion of separation that made us think that we were something other and we had to hide ourselves. That illusion of separation is the original sin. And so it's that illusion of mind that needs to be healed, because it's a spiritual and psychological illness. And that's why we came together. That's why we came together. Because there was an impulse in those who had disconnected from the source of life that was telling them that they were going off course. And just like any other creature in the natural world, because that's what we are, we're just creatures in the natural world, even though we have this overinflated sense of superiority. Like every creature in the natural world, when we're sick, we know where to go for our medicine. And so what happened is that those who had wandered away from the source of their survival, had lost their connection to life, were drawn toward those who had maintained those connections. And the response that erupted between those two groups is the same type of reaction that happens in the body when an illness comes in contact with the source of its healing. There's a huge flare-up. The fever spikes. And so we've seen that between these clash of cultures. But in the long arc of human consciousness, that's just a blip. It's a short period of time, and now people are starting to recognize that what the indigenous peoples have is the medicine for a sick world. And so even though you think it's just a romantic notion, even though I'm not making sense and I'm tired and you're tired and you can't believe that they scheduled people till 1 o'clock in the morning, who are these people? Jeez. And they have 5 a.m. walks scheduled too. I don't want to hang out with these people. They don't have any balance, right? That's very ambitious. I have this little tiny dog, and he has a real attraction for big-boned women. He likes, giant dogs like Great Danes, and he chases after him. And a friend of mine said, "Oh, he's very ambitious," right? And so this is kind of how we have to be in pursuing the changes that we want to pursue. Because how many people really want change? I'm going to wrap up in like 2 minutes because I'm tired too. Right? So a lot of people really want change, but what they don't recognize is that change requires movement, and movement requires friction, which means we have to be uncomfortable. We have to allow ourselves to be uncomfortable if we truly want to create change. And so we can't create change if we're attached to our comfort. Look at where we are. Right? There's no greater example of being attached to comfort than this place, right? So when you're coming out of days of sleeping on the ground, right? Showers are just a distant memory. And you come into a place like this, the contrast is so stark. It's so stark. But not all of you have that opportunity, right? Because you've forgotten how to walk with the sacred. And it's not your fault. It's embedded into the cultural reality that you've been raised up in. That forgetting. It's part of the deep psychological wound that we're all carrying together. And so my hope is that you'll start thinking about, what does that really mean in my life? What does it mean that I've lost contact with the source of my survival? What does it mean that I'm just looking at myself as a commodity? How am I selling myself? Right? How can I make a tangible difference today? Where's the phone tree for the million moms that need to go get those babies out of that cages? Because Facebook posts aren't enough. The time for symbolic gestures is done. Because one day there's going to be anthropologists coming from another system, and they're going to fly to this planet, and they're going to say, "Oh, look at this species. They went extinct from symbolic gesturing." It's time for us to show up. And it's time for us to strip away all of the marketing and show up whole, so that we can bring to the forefront the full embodiment of what it was we came here carrying. Because every single one of us was born with a gift that was intended to serve this time. None of you are here by accident. You're not out of place, and you're not out of time. You're just out of step with yourself and out of step with the rest of life. So my prayer for you through this time that you have here together is that you will take one step back toward yourself, and that you'll take one step back toward alignment with life. And so I'm going to end with that. So Kachiwaliwan, Pasilda and Dilnabemak, thank you very much for all my relations.